We are so honored to be joined by Jayne Mattingly. Jayne is a crystal-loving, disabled baddie who knows that resilience and rest can coexist. With a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling and a background as an eating disorder professional, she has spent her career helping others heal their relationship with their bodies, but her expertise isn't just academic, it's deeply personal. After enduring 19 brain and spine surgeries and a total hysterectomy in just 6 years, Jayne has lived the reality of body grief. Through her work, she challenges the toxic narrative that our bodies are broken, reminding us that our bodies have never been against us, which is quite a relief. As she writes in This is Body Grief, our bodies can always be trusted and they are always on our side. Jayne's approach is a mix of wisdom, humor, and raw honesty because she's learned to not take life too seriously while still soaking in every small pocket of joy. She believes that body trust is a two-way street, and her mission is to help others find peace with their bodies, not in spite of their struggles, but because of them. Welcome to our show, Jayne.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I really wanted to bring you on to our first episode because what you don't know about what you don't know about October, but you do know about me, is that both of us have worked in the space of hospice care and have just a deep familiarity with grief. And so I can honestly say that when I brought up the concept of body grief, we were both so excited to really figure out like how did this term come to be and just help support bring it to life a little bit more. And I do want to know that you and I have worked together in various capacities over the past few years while you were writing this book. And so I want to first say congratulations to you for this incredible accomplishment born out of personal experience, vulnerability, and several years of hard work amidst everything else you navigate on a daily basis.
Wow. Thank you so much, Kaylee. I really appreciate it. In October, it's really, really, really wonderful to meet you. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk about this. And yeah, to talk about it with two professionals that have worked so closely with grief in such like a different manner as well. This has been a work of passion and magic really over the past 3 years of writing this book. But cultivating the term body grief and working with it professionally and personally, I would say I've been working on this for about 7 years almost. But I think I've known body grief in my soul as much as anyone else has their whole life. We just have never been able to put our words to it, a language to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think October can attest to we do need to name our grief. And so to have given it this name is incredibly powerful. And I want to start the episode today off by just helping our listeners learn more about you, a little bit about your story and how that led to you coining the term body grief.
Yeah. Well, I could start at my eating disorder, I think. I went through puberty really young. It ran in my family. All of the women, which there are many women in my family, we are somewhat of a matriarch. And I went through puberty when I was 9 years old. And I would say that really started my body grief journey. If I had had that knowledge and language at that age, I think my life would have gone really differently. But that was a grievance on itself, like blossoming into a woman when everyone else around me was still a child. I have a little nugget here, I talk about bleeding into the days of the month underwear, when I was just a little girl. And, body grief can really be described as the loss of our bodies or the loss of the story that we were once promised in our bodies. Whether that's, this life that we were promised to live in our bodies in the past or in the future. And this story that we hold on to, and the value of that story. And so for me, I wasn't, and along with so many other people, I think that go through the similar things. For me, when I went through puberty when I was 9 years old, I didn't know what to do with that. I was, shot up like a string bean. I had boobs. I was sweaty. I was growing hair everywhere. And I really didn't know what to do with this. And I was taller than everyone. All the boys, started looking at me funny with their male gaze that I did not understand. And I started to cover up my body, started to be really ashamed of my body. And that right there was body grief. I was grieving the loss of this innocence, this little girl, this child. And I began to apologize for my body. I began to use maladaptive coping mechanisms that I do not blame my younger self for, because in that moment they worked. They were restrictive eating. They were, eating disorder behaviors, and they progressed into a full-blown eating disorder that went completely undiagnosed, completely dismissed because I, looked normal, quote unquote normal, which is now we know very common for people with eating disorders and disordered eating. I was a dancer. And then when I turned 22, I finally got help, and I went through recovery quite rapidly. I was very motivated. I'm a self-proclaimed doer. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to turn my problem into my purpose. And so I went and got my master's in clinical mental health counseling. My internalized capitalism was strong. And I was like, I'm going to help people with their eating disorders. And then I started working with people with eating disorders, and I started noticing, oh my God, that's grief. They're they're grieving, their eating disorders, they're grieving their recovered self, they're grieving their bodies. Then I started noticing so many other people are dealing with grief, aging, the loss of when they're injured. And so I really started to notice and see everything from a grief lens, because I also studied grief in my master's. And I noticed that I think I talk about this a lot with professionals. When you study grief, you kind of see everything through a grief lens. And so I was like, everything is grief. Um, and I know I'm just kind of like talking at you right now, but I'm going to get to the point. All of a sudden, I was, in my late 20s, and I was, starting my business, and I was working with eating disorders and body image, and I just felt like very much like in my place. It was like, okay, I did my hard thing. I did my eating disorder. Now we're done. Check. Good. We can move on. And so I was running these events at like bar studios and spin studios. And I was shouting from the rooftops this sentiment that kind of became like my slogan of like, work out for what your body can do, not for what it looks like. And then all of a sudden, one day in a bar class, I was tucking my little heart away, that little air hump movement you do in a bar class, and I lost my sight. And long story short, that was the beginning of my disability journey. I was diagnosed with intracranial hypertension, which was the first brain surgery out of 19. And I laid in a hospital bed asking myself, well, shoot, now my body can't do. So now what? Like, I was telling everyone, love your body for what it can do, love your body for what it can do. And I was like, well, what happens when it can't do? And I realized how ableist that was. And I realized this is body grief. I'm in it too. I'm in it too. And I really started to realize like I need to heal this, because I was just like going like the Energizer Bunny, trying to help other people heal, and I hadn't really looked inward. And so I started to study it, and henceforth the book.
It's just such an incredible story of progression. I think about like when you first started with eating disorder, and then you're like, this is grief, I think. And then you look around at the people around you, and we live in a really ableist culture. And so you were naming ones that are very common that everybody goes through. And then it kind of led you to almost like this ableist rhetoric that now I'm sure looking back, you're like, oh no, oh, I wish I hadn't done those things,
Yeah.
and it took like living within a body that couldn't do. And now just being such an advocate of body grief within every layer of ability is really beautiful, and it speaks to the disabled community in a way that I don't see
Right.
often.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it was I mean, it was shocking, because I realized in those moments as well how little exposure I had to the disabled community. Um, like I realized I've said this before and I'll say it again, like how ableist I was in so many ways because of the lack of exposure I had to disability and chronic illness, how privileged I was in so many ways because like I truly believed and was taught by my schooling that people in wheelchairs had to be paralyzed, which started my whole journey of grief with mobility aids. So, like, when I was learning that I needed mobility aids because of my spine issues and my incomplete spinal cord injury, I fought the need for mobility aids because I was like, well, I'm not paralyzed. Like, I can still use my legs. And that only made me more sick. It only made me more um, in need of more surgeries and more mobility aid help because I was fighting the need for mobility aids, which was due to ableism. And so, like, it just opened up an entire new world for me, an entire new world for my family, my friends. And here I was being one of those people that was using that ableist rhetoric without truly like the intention of harm. And it was all unhealed body grief. That's what it is. It was unhealed body grief.
Right. And I think about that even from like a grief perspective as well. Like it sounds like denial, right? And that where does that denial come from? Which is just really not wanting this to be true
Yeah.
or really not wanting this to be happening. And then also in our culture, that kind of denial of disability or the potential that you could be disabled and that you need this mobility or that somebody you love needs this mobility. It's all layered within there, whether you're experiencing the body grief itself or the people around you
Yeah.
watching you go through this and feeling levels of denial as well.
Oh, for sure. In the framework of this is body grief, the first phase is dismissal. And there's internal and external dismissal. And in that, we talk about fear of contagion. And you know, whether your body grief is disability, chronic illness, injury, menopause, fertility issues, pregnancy loss, aging, hair loss, it could be anything, right? There's no hierarchy to suffering, but you know, using disability as um, you know, an example, right? Like you're newly disabled and that is something that's causing you body grief. There's this fear of contagion where it's like people externally dismiss you. And it's because they're also so fearful that if they get too close, they're looking too close at what's happening and they're scared that that also is going to happen to them. And it is so isolating. Like it happens so often. Sometimes for me, it's like I'm a reminder of what people like I can remind people of what hurts too much. Like if they had some like a loved one that died of something that I have or is going through things that a loved one had that recently passed. Like, then I find that like people will distance themselves from me and it's like this fear of contagion and it's like it's very painful and it causes more body grief.
Absolutely. I think about that with, not only a reminder of what they maybe have been through, but a reminder that grief is everywhere all the time and we don't often heal it. And so, whatever we're carrying into every single conversation, every single situation, it like scratches at
Mm.
that scab that you've been
Right.
trying to heal um, because time heals all wounds, right? So, we can just kind of bypass any of the work that we're doing.
You're true.
But then we see somebody in active grief and really leaning into, I'm going through this process. It can really scratch at individuals who are not willing to do that work.
So true. Especially like when I see someone and they're like sitting there and like I come up to them happy and like very much like in my disability, like openly in it. And I'm like kind of fumbling with my service dog leash and I'm just like, oh, sorry. And like I'm just like being myself, openly taking up space in my
Mhm.
wheelchair. And, like I'm like a human and I have like my big hair and my makeup and like I'm just not like, you know, I'm not a sickly person. I'm not, someone's not pushing my wheelchair for me. And that's also okay. That's sometimes the case. But it's me. I'm unapologetically me. And I'm just like kind of bumping into things sometimes. Sometimes people really do not appreciate that because I can tell it is them being like, ooh, this person is like unapologetically disabled and I don't know how to take this. I don't know how to carry this. I don't know how to approach this because they're not used to seeing this. It brings out a grief in them. It brings out ableism in them. It brings out something in them. And I'm at that point in my journey where my body grief, I've healed or I'm healing enough where I'm like, I don't need to take that on. But it's very real where it's like they are in their process of their body grief journey or their grieving journey where it's like, oh yeah, it's triggering them.
Absolutely, because there's a framework of, and I know we've had this conversation of, I don't know how you do it. If
Yeah.
I were you, I would be hitting in this like box of
Yeah.
how I think people who are disabled should act, people who are grieving should act, people
Yes.
who have lost a child, who have lost a partner, and they act outside of that.
Mhm.
Because there's more to grief than just being sad.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love having these conversations very much just like, if, you are diagnosed with a terminal illness, if you have a loss in the family, if you anything like that with body grief, it's like I know gosh, we talk about it with my family when I was having there was one time where I was basically almost like I was living in the hospital. I mean, it was thing after thing after thing after thing with my illnesses. And my mom is a nurse and she's very, very, very used to these things. And she also had, a family member that was really close to her that she also was constantly in the hospital with. And so I'd be getting surgeries or being in the hospital with an emergency. And she would just be like, she'd bring in sweets and treats, and she'd also bring in magazines, and we do quizzes. And I was getting married that year. So she'd be like, what Disney princess bride would you be? And it'd be like these random quizzes. And then I'd be so high on drugs from the surgeries that I wouldn't remember the quizzes. So then we'd just keep doing them over and over and over again. But like they would be just fun things. And like my dad would be like, I feel like we have to be sad. And my mom was like, no, like, no, just because this is a sad thing doesn't mean we have to be sad. Like, we're allowed to be happy. We're allowed to like bring in treats and be happy and have ice cream and like take like, would you rather be, are you like, if we take the quiz, are you going to be Ariel, Cinderella, or Princess Tiana? Or are you going to be this, this, and this? Like, Jane's allowed to laugh. We're allowed to laugh. We're allowed to live our lives. And then, like, we're also allowed to feel the feelings. Like, she might cry in 2 minutes too.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, I love that you brought that up. That, like, yes, like, grief looks so different in all the ways. And some people are really uncomfortable with that. And at first, I remember we were laughing because, like, my dad was like, I remember being like, he was like, what's happening? Like, why are we like being happy? Why is it looking this way? And my mom was like, Ed, we're allowed to be happy. Like, it's okay.
Absolutely. I think um, one of the stories shared the popular quote from Eric from the book talks about there is a time to march and there's a time to dance.
Oh,
And I think about that all the time. I think within everything is it's a pendulum swing of we have to feel it to heal it. And for the love of God, we need to give our hearts a break and allow joy in when it is available to us.
oh my gosh. Amen. Gosh, yes, that story, Eric's story is so incredibly beautiful and it's so true. And in order to feel the joy. I mean, and feel the emotions. Joy is resistance, but also joy is an antidote to grief, as is community. Um, and, we have to replenish ourselves with those things. We have to replenish ourselves. And I think there's sometimes guilt we feel in these moments of grief. And especially with body grief, like, it can get a little confusing because, whether it's pain or whether we're grieving this life we could have had, it can feel like we can feel sometimes guilty for having gratitude, or we can feel like it's wrong for, having hope. But like, we're allowed to have hope. We're allowed to think maybe, tomorrow could get better. Like, that is allowed. Um, it's not like, wishful thinking or anything like that. It's just, like what my doctor said, you're allowed to take 3 pills of hope a day, you know, and you're allowed to lean into whatever you're feeling at that moment without, any judgment. Just like letting the weather pass, or letting the emotions pass like the weather.
And I think that's, such a powerful thing when we consider like allowing it, as opposed to feeling like we have to sit in the sad and we have to be sad.
Yes.
Because oftentimes the hope is what keeps us here, in the midst of, we don't know where the end of the tunnel is, if there's an end of the tunnel to body grief, because what you talk about within body grief are natural progressions, oftentimes, of the way our bodies work. We had aging, menopause, hair loss, infertility. There are sometimes things that just don't have kind of like if I can hold on this long, I can get through it. And so having hope within the framework of, I don't know how this is going to go, or if there's an end to it, or that there's an end to it, or solution. How do you hold hope? I think is and I feel like I've asked you this, many times, because it's something that's so prominent within chronic illness.
Oh, yes. And I think, well, here's another thing too. With hope comes hopelessness. The two cannot coexist. The two cannot exist without the other. And I think this is something that for some people is devastating, is some people only want hope. They don't want hopelessness, but you can't have one without the other. And hopelessness is dark, and it's devastation, and you're frozen. It's a deep, dark hole that you feel like you can never come out of. And it's something that is unavoidable within body grief if we're truly, truly, working our way through the cyclical, nonlinear phases. If we allow ourselves to feel our feelings, hopelessness can be one of the most healing phases of all of the phases. It's because we're actually allowing ourselves to say, I'm in the deepest depths of despair, and we're not scared of it. With chronic illness and with chronic pain, I would say hopelessness is probably one of the most common phases that people experience. And it's probably one of the scariest ones to talk to about with helping professionals. Which is one of the biggest reasons I wrote this book for a lot of reasons, but it's probably one of the biggest reasons I wrote this book is so that people with chronic illness and chronic pain could take this book to talk to helping professionals and not be scared to be committed. Because I have talked to hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of chronic pain and chronic illness clients who have comorbid diagnoses, who are suicidal, and who daily wake up and feel that they don't want to be alive, not because they have a plan, not because they have, not because they are unsafe and they want to, unalive themselves. It is because they feel in the hopelessness and depths of despair, and they want to talk about it. And their grief is so big, they want to feel heard. And once they feel heard and they talk about it, that is when hope shines through. because they finally have a community to talk about it. And the second they feel heard, literally hope is right there. Hope is right there. It's like a hand reaching out.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you, like tears come to my eyes. I cannot tell you how good that feels. And I'm sure, actually, maybe you know, because we've all had body grief. Like the second you can talk to someone and they're not like, "Ooh, I gotta call someone because you said that." The second they're like, "It's okay. I hear you. I hear you. And I'm not gonna commit you. I'm not gonna call anybody. Thank you for telling me. That sounds so terrifying." Then there's hope. And that right there is like everything to get you out of that dark hole.
I often think of the moments when my clients in grief allowed themselves to say, I don't know if I want to be here
Mhm.
without my person.
Yes.
It felt like an exhale of some kind. They allowed themselves to say something out loud that scares them to be
Yes.
thinking and feeling that would, if they were to tell a loved one, would be incredibly alarming, and could potentially escalate a situation. But not knowing if you want to stick around is pretty normal.
Yes.
It's pretty natural to, and and we have to decide this. We have to decide how we stay, how we re-engage, and how we reinvest in the world following whatever has been lost.
Mhm.
And part of that is addressing the fact that it's a maybe for people sometimes, and that's okay too.
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful.
I loved part of your I love so much about your book, and I was talking
Thank
about this a
you.
little bit earlier, but, there was a section that was titled "Feel All of Your Feelings," and I felt like that was so deeply moving because you really emphasized, like, that our emotions are an essential part of kind of our humanity, and you highlighted that what I thought and I'd never heard this concept before, so I loved it, that shock is a necessary emotion, and I know the way you did it was so beautifully expressed, and it resonated with me in a really profound way. So do you mind elaborating on that? Because I had never heard that concept before. I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, so shock is the second phase of, for those that don't know, the second phase of the body grief process. And it's something that really jolts us into, our body grief process. Dismissal is something where it's very similar to denial, where we're just kind of like, I think we're fine. I'm fine. People say you're fine. Shock is something where it's like a reality check, right? And, you know, it's very necessary because it can be quite violent at times. Um, it's it's something where it's like, that reality check that we all need where it's almost I don't want to spoil too much of the book, so I'm trying to come up with a better example than I have in the book. Sorry. Um it can be that thing that really brings us back, like back to ground. It grounds us. But it can be quite violent where we're almost in this like world where we think we're invincible. If we name our body grief and we're dealing with, I want to think of a specific, I almost want to and pull out a quote from here. Often triggered by a single fleeting incident, this is the oh shit phase of the body grief process, and it provides a necessary, if harsh, reality check. This can feel overwhelming, and we don't stay in shock for long, as our body will immediately seek to restore itself to balance, often with some form of dissociation. But the purpose of shock is to force us to acknowledge and accept exactly where we are in our bodies. Only from this place are we able to move forward, get whatever help we may need, and begin to adapt to our new normal. And, you know, I think in regards to um how we act with our shock, um, I think it's really healthy to feel that feeling because it's so easy to dissociate from that. It's so easy to just numb and um just not feel it, you know? For me, I feel like I'm constantly shocked by the fact that this is my reality. Um for instance, my husband went on a boat on a boat trip last Sunday. And I was like, I want to go. And he was like, Jayne. I was like, oh, right. I can't go on a boat. My spine cannot handle a boat. I would definitely probably be paralyzed after that. I have an incomplete spinal cord injury, and if I jostle my spine, I'd be paralyzed from the diaphragm down. Like, we laughed about it, but it was also like, damn, that was a really harsh reality check. What I wanted to do after that conversation was go smoke some weed. Not gonna lie. That's what I wanted to do because I was like, I don't want to feel these feelings. What I did was I cried, and that was healthy. But that was shock. That was 100% shock. It would have been easier to just dissociate, and I felt the feelings and I cried, and then he went and had fun on a boat and I didn't, and it sucked. And like, that's the icky part of body grief. Like, some of this book is kind of powerful and heavy and messy.
It's a powerful choice to lean away or lean in.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's common phrase, you have to feel it to heal it. That doesn't mean we check the box and we're good to go after that. Like, it will
Swish. Yeah.
I loved your stories in the book. I know I mentioned that it was Eric's story. That you also said, Kaylee. Like, I love that. Because you talk about different types of grief. Like, you were talking. I don't want to give too much away of the book either, but there were just two stories that I really, really loved. One was his with queer grief. I thought was amazing, and then the other one that I thought was fantastic was Meg's story. And the wording that she used, and I used this a lot, I think you guys too, it's verbatim. It is what it is. But I love that terminology because it kind of acknowledges reality as it stands, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I absolutely loved.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Yes. It is what it is so incredibly powerful. Because it really just sums up what life is, right? Also the situations, because how many times in our lives, or with, like, I know for me, when I keep having issues with my health and with my body and with body grief, I've updated people and I'm like, yeah, you know, I was just diagnosed with this, or I have another scan tomorrow, or I have another procedure next week. And people are like, I am so sorry. And I'm like, oh, it's so sweet that people say that, but also it's just like, it is what it is, you know? And that's what I say now. Like, it is what it is. Because what else am I supposed to say? And also I have to do it anyways. And I think that's what we get used to with body grief. As body grief accumulates, as it compounds, as grief compounds, we have to do it. We have to show up. People ask me, and I know this happens a lot with, again, the more compounded our grief becomes with our bodies, how do you do it? How do you keep going? And it's like, you just do. You have to. There's no choice. And so it is what it is. Like, this is just it, you know? Yeah, you just do it.
I often
You know?
continue it with, it is what it is, and sometimes it is awful.
Yeah.
And that's okay too.
Sometimes it's awful. Like, yeah, this week I went in for a CT scan and I had aseptic meningitis from my infusion, which I get often. And that involves throwing up all day. And I am on steroids for it. It's pretty terrible. It's pretty awful. Your brain swells. It's not good. And I went into the CT scan and I signed in, then went and threw up. And then they were like, I thought it was just going to be a CT scan, which takes like 5 minutes. And then they were like, okay, ma'am, here are 2 bottles of sugary drinks, and you have to drink this in an hour time. And I was like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. And I was like, that was a perfect, it is what it is moment. Cause I was like, this is not funny. Like, this has to be a joke. But I was like, let's see if I can keep these down, you know? And then my mom was like, and how did that go? And I was like, did not go great, but it is what it is. You gotta go with it. Cause like, what am I gonna do? I'm an adult. Like, I gotta get this done. I mean, I guess I could write a book about it, which I did.
Well, I think it's, I think it is what it is when said very flippantly can seek to minimize. Well, it is what it is. Can't do much about it. And like, yes, all of that's true. And
Yes.
sometimes you can use it is what it is as a way to say like, yeah, here we are. Here we are.
Yes, you're right. If it's said like as in your own power, it is so powerful.
Mhm.
If it's said by someone else, I will slap them.
It's absolutely. It's one of those it can be a platitude. Yeah, if the intention is to minimize, if the intention is to kind of skate past the hard part, uncool. But I do think you can take these things back and add a lot of power and processing to it, and almost like bring someone in with you. And it is what it is. Like we're right here together because I think it's just as easy to kind of like be like, it's going to be okay. And then like change the subject. And I think we're more often apt to do that in our culture. And so people are really like naturally programmed to, well, at least they found it now. And at least you're done now. And it's like, that didn't feel good. I thought we were sitting here together.
Yeah. Yes. Like I thought we were friends.
I didn't know you hated me.
The worst. Yes.
Jayne, when you were plotting out your book, I think one of my favorite components that you added were the stories that you brought in October Boyles. And I would love for you to share, like, why did you feel like bringing in more perspectives and more stories as opposed to, like, your story is powerful. You standing on your own is like, this is body grief. Yes, absolutely. But what made you choose to pull in the stories that you did and know that that was something you wanted to do for your book?
Thank you. Thank you so much. You are a big reason why I was connected to so many of these stories. Honestly, because I truly believe that we don't need another white woman's story in this world, to be honest. That was a big reason. And I happen to be one. But I'm not to diminish my story, but I didn't need just that perspective. I was like, we don't need just that perspective. We need more perspectives in this. And I was like, I want the average reader to be able to see themselves. And they're not going to be able to see themselves through my story. And I want them to see themselves through every lens that they possibly can. And of course, I wasn't able to cover everybody, but I wanted to cover as many people as I could. And storytelling is like, I truly believe, especially right now, is like kind of the only way we can preserve the truth and history and grief. And I just think it's beautiful. And so that is what I tried to do. And I'm so grateful for every single human being that shared their story. And yeah, I'm just so blessed.
Absolutely. And I think another layer to that, like almost unintentional, or maybe it is totally intentional. I trust that you've put so much thought into this book, but I think about the individuals whose stories were told, and the different identities that they hold, and how mysterious some of those identities feel to people who have never interacted with somebody who has disability, who lives within a trans identity, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we don't know. And so we kind of like, for whatever reason, lead with a lot of fear and misunderstanding, and like everything is mysterious and scary. And so by really deeply humanizing these stories and saying like, not only do these people exist, but they also are deeply human, just like you and me. And like, let's connect on that human being level is advocacy in and of itself.
Yes. Like I know with one of the stories in the book, I really, really, really made a point to do that. And there's a lot of talk right now in the country, with DEI and, trans folks. And I think I've had a couple people who pre-read the book, who I would not expect to understand. this one story, and they came around and they were like, "Oh my gosh, why was I really saw myself in this, and I was able to really empathize with this story." And I was like, "Yes, yes, that is because, like, it's a this person is a person, and this person has a body, and they have body grief, and because this is what trans people are people, and we like, but also like you're able to connect with them because it's storytelling, and it's, this isn't because it's like politicized, and it's beautiful, it's grief. And that's what I really hope this book like gets across, that it's not about that. It's about seeing people and they're people.
Mm-hmm. And we need more of it. That it is apolitical. The grief is just a result of having a body, and we all have that.
Yes.
And how that is coded in our individual experiences aside, what brings us together is the commonalities that we have, and to remove the political aspect from it, to just talk about people as they exist in this world. That is how we make these changes, is human. We're all human. We're human beings. We're more alike than we're different. Without, smashing it over somebody's head is how a lot of people raise their awareness in general.
Truly. Yeah. Yeah. I really, it's something I like. Well, that's something I really, really, really intentionally thought about with every single page that I wrote. So thank you for saying that.
And I know as a grief counselor that holding all of those stories is a lot, and having absorbed so many stories, and then having that pressure of then honoring that story within the book, that's a lot to carry. I'm wondering, like, how did you take that? How did you take care of yourself throughout this process of absorbing so much grief?
At first I don't think I did a great job with it. I think I learned along the way. At first it was almost like method acting. Like, I think I was very much in it, and it was unhealthy. I think I wrote a blog post about it, like, things are getting weird around here. Like, I was just too in it. And my husband would come home and he'd be like, "What version of Jayne am I getting today?" And then I was able to just not totally, but I was able to better distance myself from it. So I would write on the porch, and then I would disconnect from it, like kind of what I would do with my practice, where I would see clients in my office, and then, you know what I mean? And I started to do that. And I would do like mindful hand washing after, like kind of imagine like washing my hands of the stories. And go on golf cart rides afterwards, get out of the house. Or like really, really make sure I just like write right afterwards, like write the story, get it out of my head. And so really kind of like do like little rituals and things like that before and after, like kind of the same way I would do when I would see clients. But before that, I was not taking care of myself in ways that I were helpful, and that like there weren't boundaries.
I'm proud of you for recognizing and realizing, like, hey, I actually do need to care for myself, because as clinicians, I think we all take on a lot of really rough stuff, and we absorb it. I mean, that's just who we are, as helping people. We care deeply. We're very empathetic, and so we absorb it kind of into us. And without that practice of taking it off, I think of grief as like a shroud. So you're putting it on, you're wearing it, and you're experiencing it with your client or the person that you're speaking with. And when you are done, like, how are you taking that off?
Yeah.
You have to. And I think we all reach these points where it's like, oh, whoa, I'm not taking care of myself. I need to figure this out, because we know what happens to helping professionals who don't do that. So I'm just really proud of you, because it's hard to recognize, and then it's hard to change that practice when you also have a deadline.
Yeah.
There's books.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was definitely interesting at first.
We're close to the end of our time, October. Is there any last questions you want to ask Jayne?
No, I'm just so thankful that you wrote this book, and I think it's amazing. And I think that I think everyone should read this book, because honestly, grief is going to come for all of us, right?
Yeah.
And it's about anytime there's a change or transition, and no one escapes it. And so definitely, Kaylee and I were working in hospice, and we've seen that. We've seen that over and over and over again. What I don't think as humans we really realize, because one thing that I always kind of question is whenever you hear about someone passing away or dying, people will always say, well, what did they die from? Like, that won't happen to them. Like, that doesn't happen. Death doesn't happen to every single one of us. And so all of us will face grief. And I think this book is beautiful in talking about, like, not only your story, but the stories that you included in it are just super inclusive. I think you did a beautiful job with that. So you should be very, very proud of yourself. So you talked about like another white woman's story. You definitely in the book, I think we need your story. Okay. I needed your story to hear it. And that I love that. And I love that you included the other stories. So just a fantastic read.
Wow. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
As we close, Jayne, can you, since everybody, according to October, needs to read this book, and I agree, where can we find your book? When is it available? Tell us everything.
Yes, it is available March 18th, everywhere books are sold. Available for audio version, ebook. You can find me on Instagram, Substack, and on my website, JayneMattingly.com. And thank you so much.
I am so excited to see what this year holds for you. I know you're going on book tour and you've got so many exciting things as just a final step within this process of this book. I am so proud of you. I am proud to know you. And I'm thankful that you chose to come on our very first podcast episode, Jayne.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here.